Miyamura was a gloomy nerd who got ignored by all his classmates. However, everything changes when the popular girl discovers he's secretly a tattooed hottie outside of school and starts falling in love with him. One afternoon after classes, Hori was about to head home when she accidentally dropped her phone. Miyamura, who was standing nearby, picked it up, returned it, and left quietly. The next second, Hori's friend, Yuki, commented that Miyamura's Lord of Gloom and Doom persona made her suspect that he was one of those cultured otaku freaks. Toru, their other friend, added that Miyamura was a certified loner, so they couldn't even get the tea on him if they wanted to. Hori rushed out a few seconds after him, and her friends joked that she was rushing to meet up with her secret boyfriend. Unknown to them, Hori was rushing home to clean the house and pick up her brother Sota from school as her mom was working overtime. On their way back home, Hori overheard some girls discussing their next shopping spot and secretly wished she were as free of chores as they were. The following day, while she was doing the laundry, Sota returned home with a nosebleed and a delinquent emo in training, prompting Hori to panic. However, once she confirmed that Sota was fine, the stranger tried to leave, but she stopped him, saying she had to thank him properly. While they were having tea, Hori froze when he casually called her by her name. Believing him to be a stalker, she demanded answers, and he revealed that he was actually Miyamura. That plot twist was so unexpected that the next day at school, she kept staring at Miyamura like he was a shape-shifting demon. Eventually, she approached him and asked if they could speak. Once they were alone, she told him that Sota wanted him to come hang out after school because he grew a liking to him. Miyamura happily accepted the invitation but admitted that he hadn't expected Hori to speak to him after she found out he was a low-budget delinquent. Hori told him she had no reason to avoid him, and when she mentioned that he was a pretty chill guy, the idiot started blushing. However, he quickly covered it up and thanked Hori for not stereotyping him. In the days that followed, Miyamura visited Hori's place often, and as she learned more about him, they grew closer. So one day, because she had a committee meeting, Hori texted Miyamura to go to the supermarket and buy the eggs on sale. The boy immediately panicked as the sale was only until 4 p.m., so he decided to take a shortcut. As he ran, he took off his jacket and glasses, so when he jumped over the school fence and landed in front of Hori's friend, Yuki, she didn't recognize him. Later at Hori's place, Miyamura told her about his encounter with Yuki, causing her smile to disappear immediately. She didn't like the idea of other people seeing this side of him, and when she realized she'd said that out loud, she nervously told him to forget she'd said anything. Surprisingly, Miyamura admitted that he also didn't want anyone to see how carefree and laid back she was at home because those moments were special. Embarrassed, Hori hit him in the face with a glass of iced tea, and when she started calling him an idiot, he and Sota laughed. The following day, as the two stood on the balcony outside their classroom, Miyamura expressed relief that their swimming was optional for physical education. Apparently, the boy had tattoos and had been worried about what would happen if others saw them. As they kept chatting, Yuki and one of their classmates, Toru, watched them, and Yuki pointed out how strange it was that the class's top baddie had become besties with the class's loner. Toru didn't comment, but after Hori walked away from Miyamura, he approached him. He then asked nonchalantly whether Miyamura was dating Hori, and the boy denied it, saying Hori was way out of his league. However, he had already clocked that Toru liked Hori and apologized to the shocked boy for unintentionally sausage blocking him. Not long after, while they were getting ready for physical ed class, Toru was shocked to learn that Miyamura had tattoos. However, he admitted they looked cool and began to wonder whether Hori's type was closeted bad boys. Without thinking, he grabbed Miyamura's hair to feel its texture and was shocked to find the guy had piercings too. Later on the rooftop, Toru suddenly asked Miyamura if he minded him asking Hori out. Miyamura couldn't understand why Toru needed his permission and said it was up to Hori to accept or decline. However, on the way to their next class, Miyamura tried to avoid Hori so Toru could shoot his shot, which pissed her off. As she demanded an explanation, Toru interrupted her and said he would like to speak with her after school. Hori wanted to decline, but Miyamura encouraged her not to and promised to pick Sota up from school. Hori shut up after this, and once school ended hours later, she stayed back to speak with Toru. Miyamura kept his word and picked Sota up from school, but as they waited for Hori to return, he wondered what would happen to him if Hori started dating Toru. When Hori finally arrived, she called Miyamura into the hallway and angrily scolded him for telling Toru that he didn't think he was good for her. Surprised, Miyamura explained that he didn't want to ruin her rep by letting others think she had something to do with a loser like him, and that pissed her off even more. She warned him never to spout stupid stuff like that anymore, and then beat him up for daring to think that she didn't want him around anymore. After calming down, Hori told Miyamura she had turned down Toru. He said it was unfortunate since Toru was nice. Hori jokingly suggested that Miyamura date him, and to her surprise, he replied that they wouldn't look good together. Days later, as Miyamura and Hori walked back from the grocery store, Hori was happily humming an anime song. When Miyamura brought it to her attention, she grew embarrassed and admitted that she knew the song because Sota always blasted it. Intrigued, Miyamura asked what kind of songs she liked, and Hori went quiet because the only music that got played at home was anime openings and closings. When she eventually returned home, her mother was there for the first time in days, and that made her happy. Later, while she was giving her mother a shoulder massage, Sota told the woman all about Miyamura. Like any mom, she wanted to know whether the guy hanging around her daughter was shoujo protagonist material, but Hori said Miyamura was more of a shonen bad guy. Thankfully, her mom didn't mind that and asked what Miyamura's name was because she'd love to meet him. Hori couldn't respond as it dawned on her that she didn't know her newest bestie's first name. So the next day at school, she kept staring at him, unsure how to find out. She initially thought of asking him, but cringed at how that would make her look like a bad friend. She then followed him to the locker room, hoping to hear one of the guys say his name, but the boys noticed her and tagged her as a peeping Tom. Still, she refused to give up, and after school, she tried to ask Toru, but the guy got all dramatic and ran off because his broken heart still thought she liked Miyamura. Since that was a bust, Hori went home and, while eating with her family, kept thinking of other ways to find out Miyamura's first name. When her mom mentioned that she hoped to see Miyamura, Hori instantly lit up, knowing he'd definitely tell her mom his name and she'd hear it. However, when Miyamura dropped by the next day, Hori was out shopping, and by the time she returned, her mom had already left for work. Hori secretly cursed her mom for making her run errands, but then her hope returned when Miyamura mentioned that her mom had called him by his first name. She tried to make him tell her how her mom had said it, but Miyamura didn't catch her drift, which annoyed her. Seeing this, Miyamura asked Hori why she'd been acting weird lately, thinking she had a crush on someone and didn't know how to handle it. Hori had no choice but to come clean to him, and Miyamura couldn't stop laughing. Even Sota joined in, and when he started teasing his sister, she tried to strangle him. In the end, Miyamura wrote down his full name on a piece of paper and handed it to Hori. When she tried to call him by the name, she found that she couldn't and said she'd stick to his surname. She even smacked him in the head like a true tsundere, and when he started complaining, she asked if he knew what her first name was. Miyamura said it without thinking twice, making Hori feel even more ashamed of herself. A few days later, Sengoku, the student council president, handed Hori some files to work on. It had become routine for him to dump council work on her, and Yuki was convinced that Hori was being taken advantage of. As she tried to talk sense into Hori, Toru and Miyamura could only watch, knowing they were too dumb to help Hori complete the work. Just then, Sengoku's girlfriend, Ai Yasaki, walked into the class, so Hori handed the files to her. Yuki then revealed to the boys that it was Ai Yasaki's work that Sengoku always dumped on Hori, and they grew annoyed. Still, Hori claimed there wasn't anything wrong with helping incompetent people and then left, looking exhausted as hell. This worried Miyamura, and as he stood in the hallway wondering what he could do for her, Ai Yasaki suddenly bumped into him from behind. However, she blamed him for her mistake and hurriedly picked up the files that had fallen out of the box she was carrying. Miyamura assisted her, but before he could hand over the last file, Ai Yasaki rushed off, telling him to toss the files because they weren't important. The following day, when Miyamura arrived at school, there was a crowd gathered in the hallway, and a worried Yuki informed him that Hori was at the center of it. Apparently, the budget file that Sengoku had asked Hori to work on was missing, and they were blaming her for it. Hori swore that she handed all the files to Ai Yasaki, but the girl couldn't even confirm whether she'd collected them or not. Sengoku demanded that Hori apologize for losing the files, and that was when Miyamura decided to step in. He handed his bag and glasses to Toru, grabbed Sengoku by the collar, and then headbutted him. Everyone was so shocked that the vice president, Sakura, asked Miyamura what beef he had with Sengoku. Miyamura held up the file in response, revealing that Ai Yasaki had lost it. The dumb loli immediately tried to deny it, but then her brain replayed the incident, and she went quiet. Sengoku and Sakura then turned to face her, so she apologized for her mistake, and Hori forgave her. After the council left, Hori's friends rushed to her, and Hori thanked Miyamura for clearing her name. He brushed it aside as nothing, and when asked why he'd headbutted Sengoku, he said the guy had one of those annoying faces. The next day, during gym class, Toru told Miyamura that Hori's birthday was coming up over the spring break and asked for help picking out a gift, but Miyamura wasn't much help. That night, while Miyamura stayed up late thinking of gift ideas, Hori and Sota talked about him. Sota hoped that Miyamura would drop by every day during spring break, but Hori reminded him that Miyamura had a life. She also said that Miyamura would eventually stop coming over, but admitted that she'd be sad when that happened. Days later, her birthday arrived, and while Sota gave her a drawing as a present, Miyamura gave her a CD of his favorite songs, and she couldn't have been happier. Apparently, it was what she wanted, and as they watched the leaves falling outside, it dawned on them that they were now in their senior year. Weeks later, school resumed, and when Toru learned that he was in the same class as Miyamura and Hori again, he was very excited. As he kept yapping about it being the power of love, the girls behind them assumed he was dating Miyamura. Just as Miyamura began wishing he were Saitama's hairline, Yuki and Hori arrived, so he complained to them. Yuki just smacked Miyamura on the back, telling him to man up, but Toru cautioned her about misusing her gorilla strength. As the conversation shifted to random stuff, Miyamura quietly wondered if he was truly part of the group. Later in class, their teacher asked them to form groups of 4 to work on a project, and Miyamura immediately assumed he'd work alone. That had been the pattern for years, but to his surprise, Toru, Hori, and Yuki moved their tables to join him. The trio were unaware of his imposter syndrome thoughts, so they carried on as usual, but Miyamura became overwhelmed. After the class, he went to the rooftop to gather his thoughts, and even when Toru joined him, he asked what he thought of him. Toru happily listed all of Miyamura's faults, and the boy regretted asking the question, but then Toru threw in a few good points too. This moved Miyamura so much that he called Toru for the first time. The way he said it was sus as hell, and it freaked Toru out, so the boy told him he was the king of weirdos. However, he claimed it was a good thing, and after he left, Miyamura stayed back to cry happy tears. The next day, while Hori was sitting in the cafeteria to pass the time, Ayasaki joined her and asked if she was dating Miyamura. Hori told her that she wasn't, so Ayasaki declared that she wanted Miyamura for herself. This instantly triggered Hori, and she told the vertically challenged Lale to keep her grubby hands to herself. Ayasaki argued that she could do whatever she wanted, but Hori made it very clear that Miyamura belonged to her, then walked off like a boss. However, when she got to the hallway, she came down from her high and began wondering what possessed her to say such a thing. That evening, Miyamura came over to Hori's place again, but because Sota wasn't home, things got awkward pretty fast, so they decided to watch a horror movie. Miyamura hated every second of it, and when Hori's phone vibrated beside him, his soul nearly ascended. As if that wasn't bad enough, the lights went out, and Hori didn't even flinch. When they came back on, she noticed Miyamura looked traumatized, but instead of consoling him, she popped in the second disc for the movie. Miyamura immediately protested, but she told him he had no say, and that they were going to binge-watch all 5 parts. However, instead of concentrating on the movie, they began talking about their hands and held them up to compare sizes. Lost in the moment, Hori blurted out that she loved Miyamura, but quickly corrected herself, saying she loved his hands. Miyamura played along and told her he loved her hands too, but as they stared at the blank screen, he added that he loved her too. A while later, Sota returned home, excited to see Miyamura. Hori immediately instructed him to wash his hands for dinner, so Miyamura accompanied him to offer moral support. The following day at school, Ayasaki told Sakura about Hori's outburst, claiming she only made the declaration as a joke. Sakura said it didn't matter, as not everyone took jokes lightly, and Ayasaki agreed because Hori had scared her. Unknown to them, Toru was listening, and once he heard enough, he went to the stairs to think. The next day, Miyamura showed up at school with a red cheek, and when Hori questioned him, he revealed that he'd fought with Toru. Hori got angry on his behalf, but before Miyamura could explain what had really happened, Toru arrived in an even worse state, leaving everyone confused. Yuki then took Miyamura aside, and he told her that Toru had only landed 1 hit on him, shocking her even more. Meanwhile, Hori was speaking to Toru, and she asked him to explain what went down. Hori was hesitant, but revealed that he was the one who started it. What he failed to mention was that while he and Miyamura were hanging out at Miyamura's place, he told Miyamura that she liked him. Miyamura obviously didn't believe him and advised him to stop trying to be a cupid, but Toru insisted that Miyamura was either dense or in denial. Still, Miyamura maintained that Hori saw him only as a friend, and that pissed Toru off. However, Miyamura mistook his intentions and headbutted him on reflex. He immediately apologized, but Toru wasn't having it, and that's how the brawl began. He only managed to get 1 hit in before Miyamura tried to restructure his face permanently. After Miyamura stopped, Toru apologized for triggering him, but Miyamura admitted that he'd hit him because he wanted to. Back in the present, Toru still claimed responsibility for starting the fight, and he was so bummed out about it. Hori then advised him to apologize to Miyamura and make up. When she went inside, she met Yuki, and as they talked, they realized that each boy was taking the blame for the fight. However, Yuki was the only one who knew that Hori was the reason the fight happened, and she felt smug about it. Meanwhile, Miyamura approached Toru to talk things out. A few days later, Toru had just arrived at school when it started raining papers. As he began picking them up, Sakura called out to him from the student council office, so he took the papers to her. She thanked him for retrieving them, and he surprised her by complimenting her, saying he knew how hard she worked for the council. Later, he met Miyamura, who gave him some ice cream, but because he was allergic to melons, they stopped Sengoku and gave it to him. As they sat together talking, it dawned on Toru and Miyamura that Sengoku was the only guy on the student council, and the two called him a harem lord. Sengoku denied it, but they didn't believe him and said he was living it up in the council room with girls and air conditioning. Desperate to prove that it wasn't so, Sengoku invited them to hang out in the council room whenever they wanted to cool off. The very next day, the two showed up there with Hori and Yuki, and Sengoku tried not to crash out. Miyamura and Hori were then sent to get everyone drinks, so Ayasaki tried to find out if the two were dating. Toru and Yuki didn't respond, so she kept talking, saying Toru was a better match for Hori, which made the idiot hopeful. A few minutes later, Miyamura and Hori still hadn't returned, and Toru's imagination began running wild. Yuki told him to calm down, saying Miyamura must have dropped his coins or the drink. The next moment, Miyamura and Hori walked in, and when Miyamura handed Toru's drink to him, he apologized. He said that Hori had messed with him, but the dirty-minded Toru misinterpreted his words and refused to hear the rest of Miyamura's explanation. However, after he opened his drink and got a face full of soda, Sakura explained that Hori had made Miyamura drop it. Toru then sighed in relief, and Sakura handed him some tissues to clean up. Hours later, while Miyamura and Hori were studying at her place, she apologized for the broken air conditioner. He assured her that he didn't mind and casually mentioned that he slept without clothes. Hori was shocked that she told him he needed a mouth filter, so Miyamura apologized. However, it suddenly dawned on Hori that she'd never seen Miyamura embarrassed, so she tried to catch him off guard by asking to see his tattoos. The boy didn't even think twice and began stripping, prompting her to scream at him to have some shame. Confused, Miyamura asked why she was giving him mixed signals, and she admitted that she wanted to see if he could get embarrassed. Miyamura assured her that he'd gotten embarrassed a handful of times and told her about the most recent one. It had happened a few days ago when he met his old classmate, Shindo, who was convinced that Hori was Miyamura's girlfriend. Miyamura had denied it, but Shindo refused to believe him and even teased him about calling her by her last name. So without thinking, Miyamura told him that there was nothing wrong with that. The embarrassment he felt still lingered, and as he was trying to explain to Hori that he'd done it to get Shindo off his case, Shindo texted him. The guy said he'd gotten a girlfriend and wanted to go on a double date with Miyamura and Hori. He also gave Miyamura unsolicited advice to keep his sausage in a bag at all times, and the boy almost had a stroke. Hori tried to find out why Miyamura was being dramatic, but he refused to show her the text and immediately called Shindo to scream at him. It was the first time Hori had seen Miyamura all worked up, but she liked it and told him to try being that real with Toru. Miyamura suddenly grew shy at this, making Hori suspicious about what team he actually played for. A few days later, Hori was on the way home from the convenience store when Shindo suddenly approached her like they were old friends. Coincidentally, Miyamura and Toru were walking on that street when Miyamura saw Shindo speaking to Hori, so he ran over and slapped him. Hori and Toru were shocked, but Shindo just acted like it was a regular Tuesday and got slapped again for that. Miyamura then introduced him to his friends, and when Shindo began teasing him, Hori suggested they go somewhere cooler to talk. Shindo took the lead, saying he knew a spot, and as Miyamura trailed behind them, he recalled how he and Shindo had become friends. On that day, someone had caused Miyamura to drop his books, and instead of picking them up, he just stood there staring at them. Shindo returned to pick something up, and even though he initially ignored Miyamura, he came back and helped him gather his stuff. He then began trying to guess Miyamura's name, and even though the boy refused to admit it, Miyamura liked that someone was speaking to him. After that day, Shindo began speaking to Miyamura regularly, which their classmates found odd. Miyamura even overheard a guy advising Shindo to stay away from him before he'd catch the loser plague, but Shindo told the guy he was just jealous and walked away. Back in the present, Miyamura felt grateful to Shindo for choosing him back then and believed Hori was doing the same now. The next day, Hori came down with a cold and still tried to go to school, but Sota wouldn't let her and forced her back into bed. After he left for school, she fell asleep and dreamt of the past when her mom had left her at home while she was sick. When she eventually woke up, she was surprised to find Miyamura there and wondered if she was tripping. Miyamura explained that Sota had called him, saying she was at death's door, so he came over to check on her. He then stood up to get her some water, but Hori tried to stop him and fell. However, she didn't care and kept asking why he was never around. The question was actually meant for her mom, as at that moment she recalled her mom leaving for work when she was sick. When Miyamura realized it, he comforted Hori, promising her that he wasn't going anywhere, and that made her relax. A little while later, once she was fed and medicated, Miyamura decided to go to school, but before leaving, he told Hori that he was in love with her. A few seconds after the door shut, Hori sat up in bed and began to question her hearing. However, the fact remained that Miyamura had confessed to her, and she wasn't sure if she should pretend or acknowledge it. Because of that, she skipped school the next day, even though she was feeling much better. Hours later, Sota was on his way home when he spotted Miyamura walking with Shindo and a girl. So naturally, when he got home, he told Hori what he'd seen, and she immediately went on alert. Her delusional mind also convinced her that Miyamura was cheating on her with the girl, even though they weren't even dating. So, she kept interrogating Sota and was crushed when he confirmed that Miyamura had his arms around the girl. The next day, she tried sneaking into class, only for a clueless Toru to loudly call out her name. Hori was prepared to rip his tongue out, but she settled for threatening him instead and asked where Miyamura was. Toru said he was on the balcony, and when he mentioned that Miyamura was worried about her, she walked to her desk without another word. Toru found this strange, so later that day he told Miyamura about it. Miyamura hadn't even noticed that Hori had resumed classes, but he quickly deduced that she was avoiding him. So instead of going to the next class, he ambushed Hori by the lockers, and after getting over the jump scare, she tried to leave. However, she stopped in her tracks when Miyamura suddenly asked if she'd heard his confession the other day. Instead of responding, Hori asked who the girl he'd been walking with the previous day was. She secretly hoped he'd say she had him confused with someone else, but Miyamura confirmed he was the one by asking if she meant Chika-chan. Hearing him call the supposed homewrecker by her first name set Hori off, and when Miyamura realized, he quickly explained that she had the wrong idea. Chika was Shindo's girlfriend, and he had his arms around her because she tripped and hurt her ankle. The second he finished his explanation, a book smacked him in the face, and Hori began chanting Chika's name like it was a prayer. Miyamura tried to calm her down, but she threw another book at him and stormed off. Unknown to him, Hori regretted her outburst, and as she sat in her living room berating herself that evening, Miyamura showed up. He'd come to return the books she'd thrown at him, and after a few moments of awkwardness, they both apologized to each other. Hori then asked if he knew Chika's surname, and he admitted he didn't, causing her to laugh. She couldn't believe she'd been jealous over nothing and tried to blame him for not explaining things sooner, but he reminded her that she was the one who refused to listen. Trying to brush off the responsibility, Hori answered Miyamura's question from earlier, saying she'd been awake when he confessed. He already knew this and admitted that he was scared to hear her response. Hori tried to say something, but then her father, Kiyosuke, walked in and ruined the moment. Miyamura didn't know who he was until Hori kicked him in the head and began lecturing him when he began interrogating Miyamura. Kiyosuke complained that Hori was a bully, but then told her to prepare some food for him. The moment she walked away, Miyamura tried to leave, but Kiyosuke pulled him back down and began questioning him. The terrified boy managed to introduce himself, only to get teased by Kiyosuke. Just as the man was starting to get too comfortable, Hori hit him in the head with his food bowl, claiming it was an accident. Kiyosuke called Cap and then asked Miyamura if he'd ever been a victim of Hori's anger. He denied it, even though the memory of the book attack was still fresh in his mind. His reaction pushed Kiyosuke to ask about his family, and Miyamura confirmed that he had no siblings. The next moment, Kiyosuke told him that he didn't approve of him. Hori and Miyamura almost pissed their pants, only for Kiyosuke to tell them that he was joking. As their conversation continued, Hori walked over, and Kiyosuke asked if she was dating Miyamura. The two heated up instantly, and as Miyamura stared hopefully at Hori, she asked her father if he had a problem with her relationship. The man didn't even get the chance to respond before she hit his head again, but he recovered quickly and told her that he disliked guys with long hair. Miyamura quickly made it known that he was open to getting a haircut, but Kiyosuke suggested tying it back instead. He then asked Hori for bobby pins and began trying to kickstart his hairstylist career. He even got into character, making small talk and trying to get every piece of gossip he could out of his first client. When Miyamura told him he had eyes only for Hori, Kiyosuke exclaimed that he wished to be young and hopelessly in love again. However, when Hori stabbed the bobby pins into his head, he was quickly reminded that girls her age were demons in training. The next moment, they heard things drop and turned to see Hori's mother standing there, shocked. You'd think it was because her husband had suddenly shown up after 4 episodes. But to everyone's surprise, she was actually worried that they wouldn't have enough dinner for Kiyosuke. About an hour later, as Hori walked Miyamura down the street, she suddenly held his hand, and although Miyamura initially froze, he interlocked their fingers. He then told her that he wanted to get to know her more, and she replied that the feeling was mutual. When they got to the end of the road, Hori let go and bade Miyamura a good night. However, grabbed her wrist the moment she turned to say thank you, leaving her so flustered that she ran off. Unknown to her, Miyamura was just as affected as she was, so he squatted and told himself that his simping journey had just begun. Later, Toru called Miyamura to ask about an assignment. After the call ended, it was obvious that Miyamura had told him that he and Hori were in a talking stage. The following day, Sakura spotted Toru with his friends, and even though he was laughing, she noticed he wasn't actually happy. Suddenly, Ayasaki popped up behind her, wanting to know what was so fascinating, but Sakura refused to tell her. When Ayasaki insisted, saying Sakura hadn't been herself lately, Sakura told her that she wouldn't understand even if she explained. Ayasaki was very aware of her low IQ, but she was sure she could help Sakura with whatever was bothering her. Sakura couldn't help but stare at her friend, and after subconsciously comparing her to Hori, she began walking away, saying pretty girls had it easy. Ayasaki called out to her, clearly confused, and instead of explaining, Sakura lashed out, telling Ayasaki she wished she were her. She then walked off, but her mind kept bugging her because she'd been unnecessarily mean to Ayasaki. She'd often heard people talking behind her back about how she was the beast to Ayasaki's beauty, and that had chipped away at her confidence. However, Ayasaki had always been by her side, and she realized that her insecurities weren't enough reason to mistreat Ayasaki. So she ran to the council room to apologize, but Ayasaki had gone to the bathroom and scared her a bit when she spoke up behind her. Sakura then apologized and shyly admitted that she had a crush on someone. Ayasaki pointed out that it was the first time she'd seen Sakura so flustered, and that she supported whatever caused it. Meanwhile, Miyamura and Hori had just walked out of the school gate when they ran into Toru and another classmate named Shu. The boys had returned to get something, and while Hori chatted with Shu, Toru moved closer to Miyamura. He told Miyamura that he didn't want him to feel awkward around him, and that was enough to make the boy relax. A few days later, when Hori returned from school with Miyamura, Kyosuke couldn't recognize him in his loser chic. Hori told him it was his bestie, but Kyosuke refused to believe her until he personally removed Miyamura's glasses and lifted his hair. Later, after dinner, when Miyamura tried to leave, Kyosuke wouldn't let him, insisting that he spend the night. Sota then said that Miyamura could crash in his room, but the clingy Kyosuke called dibs on having a sleepover with Miyamura. As they lay side by side, Kyosuke asked Miyamura what he liked about Hori, and Miyamura said that he liked how she never judged people. The following morning, as Hori and Miyamura left for school, they had no idea they had been seen by their classmates, who immediately spread the word. Toru hated how shameless and hypocritical everyone was concerning the news, and Yuki agreed. She started crying, saying that her friends just wanted to be happy, but the haters wouldn't let them thrive. Toru didn't even know how to react to her tears, so he just awkwardly patted her head to calm her down. Meanwhile, some side characters had stopped Hori in the hallway to confirm if the rumors about her dating Miyamura were true. They couldn't believe that she'd chosen to date the school's wannabe emo guy, but Hori told them to get used to it. Miyamura, who was standing nearby, began to seethe with anger, so the following day he showed up at school rocking shorter hair that exposed his piercings, and Hori almost choked. During the break period, girls gathered around Miyamura, suddenly interested in the things he had to say now that he looked like their type, but Hori's icy glare chased them away. After school, Miyamura and Hori went home together, and once again, Kyosuke couldn't recognize Miyamura at a glance. However, once he did, he began teasing Miyamura about switching things up because Hori had dumped him. Hori screamed at him to stop talking nonsense but was suddenly cut off by the ringing of Miyamura's phone. It was Shindo calling, and he told Miyamura he was at his place and had some candy to share. Miyamura went with Hori, but Shindo was left speechless by Miyamura's new look before getting all dramatic. Because of that, Miyamura offered him a cheese-flavored candy, which he absolutely hated. However, it was the first time Miyamura had ever been so openly fruity with him, so he ate the candy to his own detriment. Hori chose to ignore them and popped a candy in her mouth, but it tasted horrible, so when Miyamura noticed her expression, he stole the candy right out of her mouth. By the time Shindo turned around, Miyamura had moved away, so he didn't suspect a thing and asked for some water. Hori was still in a daze, and when Shindo asked what was wrong, she just told him that Miyamura had stolen her candy. A few days later, Miyamura and Toru were chilling in the school courtyard, talking about how peaceful things had been since the rumors died down when they realized they were being watched. Neither of them recognized the girl, but it was obvious that she'd been glaring at Miyamura. A few minutes later, the girl approached Hori and asked if she was really dating Miyamura, and Hori confirmed it. Annoyed, the girl ran off and waited by the boys' bathroom for Miyamura. He ignored her, but then she kept following him everywhere, forcing him to acknowledge her. The girl, whose name was Sawada, loudly demanded to know when he'd break up with Hori, making those around them assume that Miyamura was a two-timer. Panicked, Miyamura denied it and told Sawada that he and Hori would forever be couple goals. Sawada took that as a challenge and ran off, promising that she would be back. After school, Miyamura told Hori about his encounter with Sawada, and on cue, the girl showed up behind them. Hori instantly turned on her, demanding to know why she was following her man about, and Sawada admitted that Hori was actually her target. She'd fallen for her at first sight and couldn't believe that Hori had settled for the likes of Miyamura. The next moment, Toru popped up from behind the lockers, screaming plot twist like he was watching the greatest soap opera ever made. Miyamura told him that he was being too loud, and Toru apologized just as Hori asked Miyamura to free her from Sawada's hug prison. Miyamura tried to reason with Sawada, but she insulted him, so he pulled Hori away, only for Sawada to pull her back, igniting a tug of war. Toru quickly texted Yuki to come see the showdown, and by the time she arrived, Miyamura had pulled Hori to himself and declared that she belonged to him. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough to keep Sawada away, and the next day she approached Hori with cookies. She tried to make Miyamura leave, but the boy wasn't about to let her steal his woman, so he pulled Hori away. After school, Miyamura ran into Sawada again, and he let her know that Hori had already left. However, as he began walking home, he noticed Sawada was following him. When they arrived at his apartment building, they were both surprised to learn that they were neighbors. Miyamura tried to enter his apartment, but when he heard Sawada say she was locked out, he decided to let her in. Surprisingly, they didn't try to unalive each other, and while eating some cake, Sawada admitted that Miyamura wasn't as bad as she had painted him to be. Miyamura immediately started laughing, which annoyed her, and when she tried to hit him, she suddenly saw her older brother smiling at her. She then told Miyamura that he reminded her of him, but suddenly switched up, saying she didn't actually have a brother. Miyamura knew she was lying, so when his mom returned home later, he asked about Sawada's family. His mom confirmed that Sawada had an older brother, but said that he died the previous year. Miyamura felt bad, so the next day, when he ran into Sawada, he was a little nicer, but she didn't want to be around him. When she tried to leave, 3 guys tried to raise her up, so she decided that Miyamura was the better option. As soon as the boys saw Miyamura, they made up an excuse to leave, prompting Sawada to say he'd thrive as a bodyguard. However, when Hori arrived later, she found the two arguing. Later in the evening, while Miyamura was at Hori's place, she shyly asked why he never tried to make moves on her, and he apologized. However, when he tried to kiss her, Kyosuke suddenly walked in, earning his daughter's anger. She wasted no time in beating him up, and when the man ran to hide behind Miyamura, she declared that they were having a horror movie marathon because she knew he hated them. A few days later, Yuki recruited Toru to help her with the trash, and the boy realized that she'd turned him into her minion since Miyamura and Hori got together. Yuki noticed he was zoning out and called his attention, but at that moment, Sakura turned the corner, and Toru bumped into her. The chocolate drink in the trash spilled on her shirt, so Toru apologized and rushed off while Yuki helped Sakura wipe the liquid off her legs. Suddenly, Sakura asked Yuki if she was dating Toru, and Yuki replied that she wasn't. However, when she noticed how relieved Sakura was by that news, her mood changed. Just then, Toru returned with his sports jacket so that Sakura could change into it, which made her secretly happy. When she showed up at the council room, rocking the oversized jacket, Sengoku asked who her fashion advisor was. Sakura deflected the question by asking about Ai Yasuki, and Sengoku said that Ai Yasuki had gone home. Curious, Sakura asked Sengoku what he liked about Ai Yasuki. Surprised by her sudden interest in romance, Sengoku admitted that he liked the fact that she was weak and needed protection. Sakura asked if he thought he was Superman or something, but Sengoku clarified that it was just his instincts as Ai Yasuki brought out his protective side. Sakura agreed but didn't mention that Ai Yasuki had also given her courage, and then she decided to stop being afraid. The following day, when she returned Toru's jacket to him, she also gave him some homemade cookies to thank him. Toru was a foodie, so he began eating them on the spot and swore that they tasted divine. When he mentioned that he liked the Sakura-shaped ones, the delusional girl became hopeful. She slyly asked if he liked Sakuras, and he cluelessly said he did, which made her smile. He then turned to leave but told her that he'd appreciate it if she brought him cookies from time to time. After school, Yuki returned to the bookshop and was pleased to find the book that she'd been looking for. However, someone else reached out for the book at the same time, and the Mother Teresa in her made her give it up. When Hori complained, Yuki claimed it wasn't that big a deal and that she could always buy the book another time. A few days later, during lunch break, Hori asked Yuki why she and Toru hadn't been hanging out as much lately. Yuki replied that he was too busy stuffing his face with cookies. Having known Yuki for 3 years, Hori could read her like a book and knew something was wrong. Yuki was the type to deprive herself of something just to please others, and Hori hated that. A while later, Yuki stood before Sakura, who offered her some cookies to thank her for the other day. Yuki didn't want it but forced herself to smile and take it, and as she turned to leave, the sight of Toru smiling at Sakura hurt her a lot. So she went to a quiet area, prepared to toss the cookies, but couldn't bring herself to do it. The following day, she asked Miyamura for tips on baking a cake. He told her that the recipe didn't always guarantee a perfect cake, but encouraged her to keep trying until she perfected it. A week later, Yuki presented her almost burned cupcakes to Miyamura and Hori, and the two didn't even try to lie to her. Hori then asked why she'd excluded Toru from the judging process, and Yuki said the guy would just make fun of her. Miyamura tried to defend Toru, but Yuki stood her ground, and when the boys suddenly showed up, she started panicking. Toru was dead set on roasting Yuki for the abomination she created, but when he noticed that her fingers had bandaheeds, he stuffed one into his mouth. He then told her that it tasted horrible, and that he couldn't wait to taste and see the next batch. That statement filled Yuki with so much hope, and she promised she would lock in. Later that week, Miyamura traveled to Hokkaido to visit his family, and after texting his girlfriend, he saw that his battery was almost dead. Unfortunately, he left his charger at home, and no one had a charger he could borrow, so his phone died. Because of that, he couldn't communicate with Hori, and those 5 days he was gone were pure torture for her, even though she pretended like she was fine. On the day he returned, he finally charged his phone and saw that Hori had left him a text. Instead of reading them, he rushed out, only to bump into Hori after he got out of the elevator, so they stood there hugging. The following week, Sakura, Yuki, and Ai Yasuki asked Hori about Miyamura's dislikes, and she told them that he hated horror movies, but watched them because of her. The girls called her a bully and said that if she didn't stop treating Miyamura like a bro, he would leave her. Their words stuck in Hori's head like one of those brain-rot songs, so during their next horror movie marathon, she tried acting like a timid girlfriend. However, she only succeeded in scaring him more than the movie, so he excused himself to go to the bathroom. While there, he heard a door close and figured Hori had gone to her room, so he went to her room after leaving the bathroom. He heard her muttering to herself, and when she finally turned to speak to him, she was teary-eyed. Miyamura then reassured her that he knew what he was signing up for when he fell for her, so she didn't have to change. After he said this, they fell into a comfortable silence and Hori couldn't help but admire the boy before her. Suddenly, she leaned into him, saying she wanted to listen to his heartbeat. Miyamura switched their positions a few seconds later, and while in their feelings, they finally had their first official kiss. Later, Sota and Miyamura were in the living room, and Sota showed Miyamura his drawing. Suddenly, he got emotional and reminded Miyamura that Hori was his big sister. Miyamura realized that the boy was afraid his sister would leave him, so he hugged Sota and promised he would always have Sota and Hori with him. They didn't know that Hori was standing by the door or that she had heard Miyamura ask if he could have her and Sota say yes. Days later, Sengoku and Ayasaki got some much-needed screen time, and Ayasaki spent most of it recalling how they got together. On that day, she just walked up the stairs when she overheard one of Sengoku's friends saying he had a crush on her. However, he added that he didn't want to approach her because she was stuck up and full of herself. The second guy claimed it was riding the high of being the most wanted girl at school, and even Sakura got astray. When Sengoku finally spoke, he said he didn't really care and that both girls seemed normal to him. His friends tried to convince him otherwise, but he walked away. Later in class, Ayasaki noticed Sengoku reading a book, so after class, she approached him to ask what book it was. While they chatted, Sengoku learned that Ayasaki also liked books, so the next day he got her a copy of Snow White and some other books he thought she'd like. Days later, she returned the books to Sengoku, and he handed her a few more. Curious, she asked if he had a private collection, and he admitted that his parents had a room full of them. Ayasaki blurted out that she'd like to see it one day and was surprised when Sengoku said she should come over after school. Later at Sengoku's place, while trying to pick out a book, Ayasaki accidentally knocked a few others off the shelf, but thankfully she didn't get hurt. When Sengoku noticed the book in her hand, he told her it was very old and that it told of the end of the world. Intrigued, Ayasaki said that if she knew the world was going to end the next day, she would blow all her money on desserts. Sengoku couldn't understand why, but she explained that she couldn't leave the world without at least tasting most of the delicious goods it had to offer. The conversation soon shifted to Ayasaki's pigtails, and Sengoku told her that they looked nice, which made her very happy. The next day at school, Ayasaki pulled Sengoku away from his friends to return the books she had borrowed, and she told him that she no longer wanted the world to end. Sengoku teased her about not getting to eat desserts, and Ayasaki complained that the end of the world wasn't the right time to be thinking about desserts. Just then, he noticed his friends watching them and decided to play matchmaker. Ayasaki brushed off his words and asked if she could come over after school. She said yes. However, he said that he was at risk of getting the wrong idea about her intentions towards him. Later, while they were at his place, Ayasaki shyly asked what he'd do if he heard the world was ending. Sengoku admitted that he'd confess his feelings to her and then await his tragic end. Ayasaki assumed he was teasing her, but Sengoku replied that he was never a fan of comedy. At this, Ayasaki tapped his shoulder so he could turn to her, and she was surprised when she saw that he was as red as a fire truck. He tried to play it off, but Ayasaki still teased him before admitting that she liked him, too. Back in the present, Ayasaki was pulled out of her thoughts when Sengoku returned a book to her. She then asked if he'd enjoyed the book, and he gave her a lame answer before walking away, but she knew that he'd cried while reading it. That evening, while Hori was painting Miyamura's toes, he suddenly got the urge to step on her head and actually went through with it. When he realized what he'd done, he began apologizing, but Hori wasn't angry with him. She said it was the first time he'd let himself go around her as he did with Shindo and the others. This made him ask if she wanted him to be violent towards her, and she said no, even though the masochist in her secretly found it hot. The next day, when Miyamura got to school, he started acting weird, and even Sengoku noticed. He assumed Toru had done something, but the boy swore he was just as clueless as he was. Shu then asked Miyamura what had happened, and Miyamura pleaded with him to put him out of his misery. It was at that moment they realized that Hori was to blame, and just as Sengoku advised Miyamura to stand up for himself, Hori walked in. Miyamura immediately went back to being weird, but thankfully, Hori took pity on him. Later, while the couple was hanging out in an empty classroom, Miyamura decided to grant Hori's masochistic desires. However, some girls walked in on the scene, and after they ran away screaming, Miyamura told Hori that he wanted Brooke to play at his funeral. Meanwhile, Yuki had just been confessed to and wasn't sure how to react to it. So it took her 4 days to tell her friends about it, and when they asked what she wanted to do, she said she'd turn the guy down. However, she felt it would be wrong to turn him down without a proper explanation, so Hori suggested that she have Toru pretend to be her boyfriend. Yuki didn't want to, but Miyamura already called Toru and asked him to meet them. When he arrived, they gave him the details, and he agreed on the spot, making Yuki a little flustered. While they waited for the guy to arrive, Toru told Yuki he'd play the jealous boyfriend, so the guy would back off. Just as Yuki told him that he didn't have to, the guy arrived, and her friends were gagged. Mystery Boy was way hotter than Yuki had let on, and even Toru admitted to himself that he'd say yes if the tall hunk of fine asked him out. When the boy noticed him, he introduced himself as Yanagi and then told Yuki that he wouldn't bother her anymore because he could see that she was in a relationship. After he left, Hori demanded to know why Yuki would reject such a fine specimen, and she admitted that he was too hot for her to handle. However, she also got curious, so the next day she asked Ayasaki if she knew anything about Yanagi. Ayasaki said she did, but before she could say more, Yuki and everyone in the hallway saw Yanagi bump into his classroom door a few times. It turned out that the guy's eyes were 240p, so he always had little accidents like that. This made Yuki assume he'd mistaken her for Hori, so after school she approached him to clarify things. To her surprise, Yanagi said he didn't know who Hori was and had always liked Yuki. Just then, Hori arrived with Miyamura and Toru, and they got to witness Yanagi's confusion in real time. Another day, Hori put Miyamura's hair into pigtails, and while she was showing off her work to Yuki and Toru, some girls crowded around Miyamura. Of course, this pissed her off, so after the girls left, she smacked Miyamura for just sitting pretty. Then she grabbed his bag and screamed at him to follow her, but Miyamura lingered for a few seconds. When he eventually caught up with her, Hori scolded him into silence and then continued walking like she'd done no wrong. They hadn't gotten very far when Miyamura's old classmates walked by and stopped to speak with Miyamura. The conversation was very one-sided, and the blue-haired one, Tanihara, tried to belittle Miyamura as much as possible. When Miyamura remained silent, Hori stepped forward and asked the two idiots if they were done talking. They ignored her question and began telling her that Miyamura was their class outcast. It wasn't until they noticed that Hori's aura had turned deadly that they shut up, but it was already too late, and she introduced them to her fists. She then continued on her way home with Miyamura, telling him she felt better after letting out her pent-up anger. A while later, Tanihara met Shindo at a restaurant, and when the boy saw his face, he asked who he pissed off. Tanihara explained that it was Hori and Shindo who sympathized with him, but warned him to stop trying to mess with Miyamura. He knew that Miyamura lived rent-free in Tanihara's head, but he wasn't exactly sure why the guy was so obsessed with Miyamura. Speaking of Miyamura, he was doing the dishes with Hori, and when he asked if her hand hurt, she pretended not to know what he was talking about. Miyamura played along but couldn't stop staring at her because of how grateful he was that she was always there for him. The next day, on their way home from school, Hori pleaded with Miyamura to talk dirty to her, but he refused. As she began trying to convince him that a little degradation never hurt anyone, Shindo appeared out of nowhere. He was on Hori's side, but Miyamura assured him that his opinion didn't really count. At this, Hori accused Miyamura of not liking her anymore, so Shindo volunteered to fill in for Miyamura and got rejected. He then tried to throw hands with Miyamura, but the boy wasn't interested and asked Hori to come with him. Hori pretended like her ears were on downtime, forcing Miyamura to switch into her dream man and pull her away. Shindo just stood there, wondering whether to call the cops or the hospital. Later, Tanihara and his friends were hanging out outside a convenience store when Hori walked out. Tanihara and the one she beat up instantly went pale and pretended to be picking trash, but the last guy tried to pick a fight with her. They warned him to shut up if he didn't want to get beaten, and as they watched, Hori walked up to Miyamura. However, Miyamura suddenly slapped her and pulled her away, leaving the guys even more afraid. Unknown to them, Miyamura felt bad about what he'd done and tried to apologize, but Hori seemed so happy that he just hugged her. The next day, Miyamura and Toru were sharing a drink in front of the vending machine when one of their classmates, Mizuchi, came to get a drink. Toru called out to him, but the guy ignored him, and Miyamura revealed that Mizuchi had feelings for Hori. Toru could relate to the guy, but he also knew that the guy wouldn't have been able to handle Hori. Suddenly, Miyamura noticed his phone was missing, so he went to the science room to look for it and found Mizuchi. The guy didn't want to talk to him, but when he heard that Miyamura was looking for his phone, he offered to call it. To their surprise, the phone rang out from Miyamura's back pocket, but then he dropped it, and it stopped working. Mizuchi immediately called him an idiot, saying he couldn't understand what Hori saw in him. Instead of feeling offended, Miyamura asked Mizuchi if he could ever hit Hori. Confused, Mizuchi answered that he could never do such a thing, and Miyamura told him that it was for that reason that he couldn't be with Hori. After they left the science room, they met Hori, and Mizuchi was shocked by the way Miyamura treated her. He then tried to be her shoulder to cry on, but Miyamura told him not to and continued walking. As they continued walking, Mizuchi called out to Miyamura and apologized, saying he'd misjudged him. Later, Tanihara found himself locked in a locker with Miyamura, and when he demanded to be let out, Miyamura told him they were already outside. He then got all philosophical and said that Tanihara had always been on the inside, so he didn't know how it felt to be on the outside. However, he believed that Tanihara didn't really care where he was, as long as he had people with him. Suddenly, rabbits appeared around them, and Tanihara recalled an incident from their old school. But the next moment, he woke up and called Shindo, asking for Miyamura's number. Once he got it, he called Miyamura, but Miyamura didn't pick up, which led Tanihara to assume he was being ignored. However, he wasn't ready to give up and went looking for Miyamura at his family's cake shop. Miyamura froze when he saw him, but he regained his composure and told Tanihara that their shop was already closed. He recommended another shop, but Tanihara said he'd return when the shop opened to get some cheesecake and fruit tarts. He then told Miyamura that he tried to call him, and Miyamura explained that he'd taken his phone for repairs. Realizing he hadn't been ignored made Tanihara reflective, but he decided not to say anything and turned to leave. Miyamura bade him farewell, and as Tanihara walked home, his conscience began bugging him. In the past, he'd been charged with feeding the school rabbits during the holidays, but he'd forgotten, so they starved to death. He'd then told everyone it was Miyamura's fault, and that was how he became the school outcast. He felt guilty, but his pride hadn't let him come clean, so he could only pay for his sins in silence. Later, while Miyamura helped Hori pack up some old books, he found her old yearbook. Hori said yearbooks were a hassle, but she couldn't bring herself to get rid of them, and Miyamura told her he felt the same way even though the memories weren't so great. Suddenly, Miyamura talked about their own yearbook and said he hoped it would include a photo of him with Mizuchi, because they had sort of become friends. He also said he and Tanihara were cool now and that things were starting to look up. Sometime later, Hori and Miyamura were on their way to school when they ran into Tanihara. Things got awkward pretty fast as they weren't sure how to navigate their new friendship, but Hori wasn't having it. She grabbed Tanihara and shook him, saying she wouldn't let him steal her man. Tanihara assured her that they were just friends and that she should be more worried about Shindo. Miyamura immediately denied the allegations, but Shindo showed up at that moment, so Hori asked how things were with his girlfriend. Shindo said they hadn't hung out in a while because she had exams, so he'd spent all his time with Miyamura. As expected, Hori got mad, so Tanihara took Shindo away to protect him from Hori. She then told Miyamura that if he ever fell for someone else, it had to be a girl because she couldn't stand the idea of losing him to a guy. That weekend, Yuki's older sister took her shopping so she could carry all her stuff. As Yuki began complaining, Yanagi approached her, and they started chatting. Yuki only remembered her sister was there when she felt her glaring at her, so she introduced them to each other. Her sister wanted to know the nature of their relationship, and Yanagi told her that Yuki had rejected him. It took a few seconds for her to process those words, and when she did, she used her outside voice. Yuki told her she was overreacting, but her sister just glared at her in disappointment and walked away. Yuki then apologized on her behalf, but Yanagi said he didn't mind as he got to speak to her. He only worried that Toru would get mad, but Yuki assured him that Toru wasn't a caveman. After he left, she couldn't help but feel like a fraud because she knew her relationship was a lie. The following week, everyone was talking about Yuki and Toru's supposed relationship, which crushed Sakura. The next day, Yuki met Ayaseki and came clean to her about the lie because Sakura had asked her again whether she was dating Toru, and she had sworn that they were. Ayaseki then asked if Yuki had come to her, hoping Yuki would tell Sakura the truth, and Yuki admitted that she had a crush on Toru. However, Ayaseki surprised her by saying that she wouldn't tell Sakura anything if Yuki admitted that she had a crush on Toru. Yuki complained that Ayaseki was being unfair, but Ayaseki said Yuki was the one being unfair, and Yuki couldn't agree more. Her lie had left Sakura completely crushed, yet she couldn't bring herself to tell her the truth. About a week later, Hori told Miyamura and Toru that she was worried about Yuki because she hadn't been coming to school or returning her texts. Toru said she hadn't replied to his texts either and speculated that she might be dealing with family problems, but he didn't even believe that. Meanwhile, Yuki was getting scolded by her sister, who asked how long she intended to stay away from school. When Yuki didn't respond, she hit her head, then sighed, knowing Yuki was acting out because she wanted something she thought she shouldn't have. She'd been like that since she was little, and she only ever spoke up when she was completely overwhelmed. Later, when Yuki returned to her room, she turned on her phone and began reading her missed messages. She only stopped when she saw Toru's message about Sakura confessing to him. It was like a wake-up call to her, so the next day she returned to school. Hori immediately went to speak to her, but then Toru showed up and asked to speak to her in private. She nervously followed him to the rooftop, convinced that he was about to cut ties with her, but was surprised when Toru told her that he and Sakura weren't together. She still believed that he was dating Yuki, and Toru didn't see the need to correct her. He also said she was way out of his league, so he never would have accepted her confession even if he hadn't been pretending to date Yuki. His words were music to Yuki's ears, so she relaxed and teased him about losing his cookie supply, but he said it was fine. She then got lost in her head, thinking about how it was selfish of her to rob Sakura of a chance at happiness after she'd made so much effort to secure it. When she let out a breath, Toru pointed out that he could see it, and she reminded him that it was cold. Toru said he liked it and hoped it would start snowing soon, but Yuki didn't want that. She claimed snow was such a hassle to deal with, and that people only pretended to like it, hoping spring would come sooner. Her statement prompted Toru to give her a whole speech about snow melting, and he asked if she really believed it melted because the Sakura had asked for it too. At that moment, Yuki realized they were no longer talking about nature, but she chose to remain oblivious and told Toru he needed extra science lessons. Toru assured her that he knew and then began leading her away, but the flustered girl moved away from him and tried to act like she wasn't burning up in excitement. After school, Sengoku asked Ai Yasaki if Sakura had a boyfriend because he'd noticed she looked happier. Ai Yasaki replied that it was the opposite and left, but that only gave Sengoku more questions to ponder. When Sakura showed up later, he asked if something had happened, but she refused to tell him anything because she spotted Toru and Yuki outside. She then tried to leave, but Sengoku stopped her, forcing her to admit she had been rejected. Sengoku said the guy had to be stupid and tried to cheer her up, but Sakura broke down in tears. He could only watch her, and when he remembered that she'd been watching Toru, he made the connection. A few days later, the gang learned from Toru that Shu had a younger sister named Motoko and insisted that Shu was pretty chill outside of school. However, the next moment, the guy barged in, destroying that image. Hori and Yuki immediately got in his face and told him to start acting more responsibly, leaving him speechless. Later, while they were hanging out in the student council room with Yanagi, Shu told him to try being casual with them. Yanagi said he couldn't switch on command, but Shu kept insisting and got hit in the head by Toru, who told him to let Yanagi be. Yanagi assured Toru that he wasn't annoyed and that he really hoped he could get closer to all of them. Just then, Sengoku walked in and was hijacked by Miyamura and Toru, who wanted to show Yanagi how close they were. Shu was equally surprised as he'd never once dared to be so casual with Sengoku, and when they began arguing, Hori left to find Yuki. The boys didn't even notice, and when they stopped, Yanagi agreed to call Toru by his first name. Shu asked that he do the same with him, but Yanagi said his limit was one at a time. Miyamura was silent the entire exchange, prompting Sengoku to ask if there was a problem, and he admitted that Yanagi might be on his personal blacklist. As Sengoku tried to figure out why, Yanagi called out to Miyamura and promised him that he wouldn't take anyone from him. Miyamura instantly grew flustered, so he called Yanagi an idiot and ran away. The next day, Miyamura tried to test how comfortable Sawada had become around guys by having her talk to Toru and Sengoku. Sawada said he didn't have to do that, as she was already comfortable speaking to Toru because he was always nice to her. As for Sengoku, she'd never interacted with him, so she wasn't very sure. Toru smirked at this, but Sengoku wiped it off by offering Sawada some candy, completely stealing her attention. Refusing to be outshone, Toru also pulled out some candy from his pocket and offered it to Sawada. As they fought for her attention, Miyamura saw Hori and Shu approaching and tried to signal Shu to be quiet, but the boy could never be silenced. The moment Sawada heard his voice, she panicked and tried to hide behind Miyamura, so Sengoku advised Shu to get a lock for his mouth. Miyamura then tried to plead Shu's case, but Sawada said she disliked loud and annoying people, and Shu proved she was right about him by acting all dramatic. Later, while he was speaking to Hori and Yuki, they noticed that he wouldn't stop coughing. They were certain he was sick, but Shu argued that their diagnosis was wrong, so Hori grabbed his face to check his temperature. Seeing that it was high, they kicked him out, telling him to go home and rest before he infected anyone. On his way out, he noticed Sawada struggling with a box, so he helped her carry it, and thanks to his sore throat, he didn't say a word. After they got to the science lab, Sawada tried to thank him, but then Shu remembered Hori's warning to keep his germs to himself, so he signaled her to stop talking and walked away. Sawada immediately assumed he was mad at her and began thinking of ways to appease him. The next day, Shu was back to his usual self, and as he yapped Hori and Yuki's ears off, Sawada watched him from behind the door. When Sakura arrived and saw her, she asked what the issue was, and Sawada admitted that Shu might be mad at her. Those words sounded wrong together, and Sakura assured Sawada that Shu couldn't even get mad at a fly. She urged her to go in and speak to Shu, but before Sawada could decide, the guy walked out. And the moment he opened his mouth, Sawada was reminded why she disliked him in the first place, so she screamed at him and ran away. Shu didn't even understand what he'd done wrong, so Sakura told him it wasn't his fault he was born stupid. When he returned home later, he found Motoko half lying on the couch, so he went to sit with her while flipping through the papers. Suddenly, Motoko told him she wasn't going to have dinner, and when he asked why, she revealed that her teacher had laughed at her choice of school. According to the man, her grades weren't good enough, and it would be better if she aimed for a lower-ranked school. Shu asked what was so laughable about her grades, and Motoko tried to hit him, but he caught her hand. He then told her that her teacher had no right to laugh at her because he knew how hard she studied. Motoko broke down in tears and told him that no matter how hard she tried, her grades didn't improve, so her teacher was right about her. Shu obviously disagreed, so he encouraged her to keep doing what she was doing and said that if she couldn't get into her school of choice, she could always apply to his school. However, the next day, he asked Hori to help tutor Motoko, and when the girl showed up at her house, Hori was very welcoming. She asked Motoko to go wait in her room while she made herself some tea, but before Motoko could do that, she encountered Miyamura and Sota. She assumed they were both Hori's brothers and got a little flustered. Meanwhile, Hori recalled how Shu had asked for her help. He said he didn't want Motoko to be disappointed and that if there was even a slight chance she could get into her dream school, he wanted her to have it. Because of that, when Hori joined Motoko in her room, she told the girl that they would have a girls' day instead of a study session. While they talked, Hori learned that Motoko thought highly of her brother but worried that he disliked her. Meanwhile, Shu visited a shrine with Toru to buy Motoko an exam charm, but he wasn't even sure she'd accept it. It turned out that the siblings misunderstood each other and kept praying that the other wouldn't hate them. A few days later, Toru had dinner with Sengoku and Shu, and he confided in them about his relationship. The two had assumed he'd already made things official with Yuki, but he explained that they were in a situationship and that he liked how things were. Sengoku said there was nothing wrong with that and advised Toru not to stress over labels, earning a look of astonishment from his friends. The next day, Yuki asked Toru if she could come over and play video games, and the boy tried to refuse. However, in the end, he told her that she could come over. After school, he snuck her into his house, leaving her with so many questions which flew out of her head the moment he locked the door behind them. As if that wasn't enough, he began taking off his tie, so Yuki demanded to know what his game plan was. Toru told her that he didn't have a hidden agenda and even opened the door to reassure her. Yuki tried to explain that she trusted him, but she kept stuttering because she was so nervous. Suddenly, a woman's voice called out to Toru, and the boy panicked. He also tried to lock the door again, but the person was already pushing against it. Seeing this, Yuki offered to leave because she thought Toru wasn't allowed to have visitors, causing Toru to turn all his attention to her. This allowed the woman to come in, and she asked Yuki if she'd like to have some cake. Toru didn't appreciate the intrusion, and when the woman turned to leave, he warned her not to barge into his room again. Once they were alone, Yuki asked if the woman was his mother, and he told her that she was the house manager. He'd been trying to avoid introducing them because she'd been hounding him about Yuki, and he didn't want Yuki to be uncomfortable. Just then, the woman returned to ask what kind of cake Yuki preferred and warned Toru to keep it in his pants. The boy assured her that her presence in the house was enough to keep his soldier down, and Yuki began wondering if things would have been different if it were just them in the house. Once the manager left again, she calmed Yuki down and then set up the game she'd come over to play. The next day at school, Sengoku was shocked to walk into the student council room and see Ayasaki. Their friends didn't understand why until he turned down Ayasaki's invitation to come over during Christmas. When she started crying, they all turned on Sengoku and demanded an explanation. He told them that Ayasaki's room was an insect haven and he didn't want to spend Christmas staring at a mantis. Ayasaki tried to calm him down, saying she would remove the insects, but Sengoku wasn't having it. When Christmas Day finally came, Hori showed her parents a report card, and her mom praised her for acing her subjects. However, she reminded Hori that her next result would be her last, and Hori began to wonder what her life would be like after graduation. Sota tried to get her attention, but Hori barely glanced at him, and when she finally did, she screamed at him to be quiet. Meanwhile, the rest of the gang was celebrating Christmas in their own way. Yanagi was out in town when he ran into Yuki's older sister, who was just returning from a job interview, and they began talking. Tanihara was home, but then he got into a fight with his brother because the guy would stop blocking the television. Toru and Yuki went on a date, and Shu stayed in with Motoko, who almost forgot to eat because she was studying. Somewhere in a park, Sakura had to give Sengoku a pep talk before he agreed to go over to Ayasaki's place. In the same place, Shindo sat with Chika-chan and asked her to wait a year for him to graduate as well, and she promised to. Back at Hori's place, her family kept complaining because Miyamura wasn't spending Christmas with them. Hori told them that he had to help at the cake shop but said he'd drop by soon with the cake she ordered. When he eventually arrived, they were more excited to see him than she was, and they convinced him to stay and have tea. An hour later, Miyamura decided to return to the shop, so Hori said she'd walk with him. They were quiet for a while, and Hori even trailed behind Miyamura, making him wonder if she was okay. He got his answer when she suddenly told him that they were graduating soon. Miyamura said they still had some time, but Hori didn't think so, saying there was still a lot she didn't know about him. Miyamura remembered saying those exact words to her, and just like back then, Hori said she wanted to learn all about them. She also said she wanted to be with him even after graduation, so Miyamura suddenly blurted out that they should get married. He then grew flustered and tried to leave, but Hori stopped him, promising that she would always make him happy. Miyamura pointed out that the guy was supposed to say that, but Hori didn't care for gender norms and told him that she could do whatever she wanted. Miyamura backed down, and as they were saying their goodbyes, Miyamura received a call asking him to return to the shop, so he rushed off. It was then that Hori realized how cold it was, but her cheeks were particularly hot. On New Year's Eve, Miyamura and Hori visited the shrine to offer prayers, get fortunes, and enjoy some hot drinks. On their way home later, they promised to be together forever and held each other's hands. Weeks later, everyone went to school to clear out their belongings. While everyone struggled with their stuff, Hori somehow had nothing to say, so her friends tried to recruit her as free labor. When Shu arrived, they all got chatting and began returning stuff they had borrowed at the start of the school year. Thanks to that, Shu ended up with his hands full, so she suggested that the strongest amongst them help everyone else carry their stuff. Surprisingly, he said Miyamura was a weakling and that Hori should do the heavy lifting. Annoyed, Hori dumped her and Miyamura's stuff on Shu and pulled Miyamura out of the room. Meanwhile, Ayasaki was sitting in the student council room reading old travel magazines when Sakura walked in. As they began talking about visiting the zoo, Sengoku and Yanagi arrived, so Sakura showed them the magazine. The boys said it would be a 2-day trip, and Yanagi felt it would be more fun if they drove themselves. Yasuki lit up at this, and even though Sakura said it was impossible, Yanagi began talking about getting a license. Sengoku welcomed the idea and said he would love to drive Yasuki around, but the girl suddenly lost her enthusiasm. She then made up an excuse to leave, but Sakura grabbed her shoulder and demanded answers. Yasuki swore there wasn't a problem, but Sakura didn't believe her and asked Sengoku to hold Yasuki in place. Yanagi didn't understand why until Sakura began tickling Yasuki and pulling at her cheeks. He tried to get her to stop, even though Yasuki was a willing victim, and Sakura assured him that her method was guaranteed to get them answers. When Sengoku finally let go of Yasuki, she admitted she didn't like the idea of Sengoku getting a license or a car because it meant he could leave her at any time. The trio stared at the innocently dumb girl for a few seconds before Yanagi began explaining how Sengoku getting a license was more beneficial to her. Since she'd also mentioned that she was afraid they would all grow apart after graduation, Sakura promised that she would work hard to maintain their friendship. Yanagi then suggested that they take a post-graduation trip to the beach once he got his license, and the atmosphere in the room became lighter. While all that was going on, Miyamura was at Hori's place, and when he discovered that she'd fallen asleep under the kotetsu, he decided to become her pillow. He also took his time to stare at her and couldn't help but feel grateful that he had her. Just as he began wishing their time together would never end, it suddenly dawned on him that his life could have taken a different turn if he hadn't helped Sota that day. Not only would he have remained a loner, but their entire friend group wouldn't have even existed. They would have all just been casual acquaintances who barely remembered each other's names. Through it all, Miyamura wouldn't have made any effort to speak to them, and would have ended up hating his school days even more. His imagination soon brought him to the point where his current self was speaking to his what-if self, but Hori woke up at that moment and called out to him, snapping him back to reality. She asked why he looked so serious, and he told her he was just thinking things through. Hori then sat up and told him that everything that happened to them was fate, and Miyamura couldn't agree more. A week later, their graduation ceremony was held at the school gym. Sengoku was called up to give the graduation speech, but before he could begin, Miyamura sneezed, causing their classmates to laugh. So after the ceremony, Sengoku chased Miyamura through the hallway, trying to get back at him for unintentionally embarrassing him. However, he couldn't catch him and ran into Toru, who lectured him about running in the halls. During that time, Miyamura made it to the rooftop, and while he was trying to catch his breath, his former self spoke up from behind him. He told Miyamura that he was glad he was having fun and asked how life had been. Miyamura replied that things had been great and that he no longer had to hide who he was because he had friends and a girlfriend who accepted him. He then turned to look at his old self and apologized for ignoring him instead of embracing him. His former self then stepped forward and changed into the young Miyamura, but he was finally smiling. He told Miyamura that he would disappear so he could continue living happily and congratulated him on graduating. The next moment, the door opened, and some random character told Miyamura that they were taking photos downstairs. When Miyamura didn't move, he asked if there was a problem, and Miyamura replied that everything was fine. Meanwhile, Sawada had attached herself to Hori and refused to let go, so Hori told her that she could come over to her place from time to time. When Miyamura came down and saw them, he decided to let Sawada have her moment. Toru, who had been standing beside him, then walked downstairs and bumped into Sakura. He didn't know what to say, so Sakura extended her hand, saying that he was one of the reasons she had a happy senior year. Toru was kind of dazed when he shook her hand, but he did feel relieved after she ran off. Unknown to him, Yuki was standing at the corner, and she'd heard their conversation. When she turned to leave, she bumped into Yanagi, and after a few awkward moments, he told her about the trip. He said he wanted everyone to go on it, and Yuki told him to count her in. Meanwhile, Miyamura was standing outside when Kyosuke suddenly showed up and said he wanted to take a photo with him. Those around assumed he was his dad, but Hori suddenly showed up and claimed the prodigal father by screaming at him and telling him he was embarrassing her. Kyosuke ignored his whiny daughter and went to take photos with Miyamura, which set Hori off even more. Outside the school gate, Motoko was waiting for Shu, and when he walked out with his friends, he was surprised to see her. However, the roles were soon reversed when Shu revealed his loud and obnoxious side to her. While they waited at the traffic light, she asked if he'd been body snatched, and he assured her that he was the real Shu. Later, as Miyamura and Hori walked home, he thought back on their time together and couldn't help but be happy. He hadn't expected things to shape up the way they did and was determined to keep them that way while making Hori the happiest person alive. That's all for now, but would you like a love story like this? If you got this far, comment otaku. Also, don't check out this next video.